All right, welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today.
Yeah, a little bit more, let's say, hands-on, practical.
Exactly, yeah. Less theoretical, more how can you actually use this information? And it all revolves around something you see literally everywhere in Germany.
Oh, yeah. You can't walk down the street without seeing these three little letters.
The EV, the
It's, uh,
Eingetragener Verein. So many clubs, organizations, initiatives, they've all got it.
and for good reason. It's kind of the go-to legal structure for a huge amount of activity here. Think sports clubs, cultural groups, social causes.
So today we're going to do a deep dive into exactly what an EV is, but not just that.
We could go beyond just explaining it. This is about how you could actually set one up.
Your own EV. So where do we even begin?
Let's start with the basics. Eingetragener Verein literally means registered association. And the key is that registration.
Because that's what makes it official, legally speaking.
Right. When association is officially recorded in the Vereinsregister, that's the association register, kept at your local court boom, it becomes a legal entity. It's like recognized as its own thing, separate from the people involved.
So it can do things like own property, sign contract.
Exactly. And it also means limited liability for the members, which is huge, right? Protects individuals from being personally responsible for the association's debts and stuff. Now, here's the thing. There are two main types of EVs.
Okay, this is where it starts getting a bit more complex. Hit me with it.
We have the ideal Verein, and this is what most people think of when they hear EV groups focused on nonprofit goals.
Got it. So promoting arts and culture, running a sports club for the community, helping out with a social cause, that sort of thing.
You got it. Their main purpose isn't about making money, it's about that ideal goal. They can bring in some cash, but
But it has to be secondary to that core nonprofit mission, like
Yeah.
membership fees to keep the lights on, that kind of thing.
precisely. And the German legal system, it really favors this kind of EV, the non-commercial ones. Now, the other type is called a wirtschaftlicher Verein.
Wirtschaftlicher, meaning business, commercial.
Exactly. Their primary purpose is economic activity. But, and this is important,
I have a feeling there's a but coming.
yeah, they're actually pretty rare. Why? Because German law specifically, paragraph 22 of the BGB, our civil code lays down the law.
So BGB, that's the Bürgerliches Gesetzbuch.
Yep, the big daddy of German civil law. And it says that to even start a wirtschaftlicher Verein, you need special permission from the state.
A Genehmigung.
Sounds like a bureaucratic headache.
It can be. And getting that permission is not easy. So most groups that want to do serious business, they go for a different structure entirely, like a GmbH, a limited liability company.
Right, makes more sense if your main aim is profit-making. So for our deep dive today, we'll be focusing on setting up that first type, the ideal Verein. Those focus on nonprofit, community-minded goals. Sounds good. We'll break down all the steps, the legal jargon,
Yeah.
and even point you to some grants. Might be helpful.
Perfect. So first things first, what are the absolute musts to legally establish an EV? What are the legal requirements?
All right, if you want to get that official EV status, you got to round up at least 7 founding members.
Okay, 7 people to get the ball rolling. Makes sense. And can these be like individuals, organizations, a mix?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Individuals, other organizations, a mix works too. Now, if you've got less than 7 people, don't worry.
You can still be a club or group, right?
Totally. You can operate informally as what's called a nicht eingetragener Verein, an unregistered association. But
But you won't have that legal recognition, that juristisch person status.
exactly, and that comes with all those benefits we talked about.
Yeah.
Owning property, limited liability. So aim for those 7 members.
Got it. Now let's dig a bit deeper into that ideal purpose. We kind of touched on it, but what are some real-world examples that really fit the bill?
Sure. When the law talks about an ideal purpose, it's looking for goals that are, at their heart, not about making money. So think, promoting arts and culture. That could mean organizing exhibitions, putting on plays, running a music festival.
Right, stuff that benefits the community culturally. What else?
We can have a sports club, not talking about professional teams here, but those focused on getting people active, promoting a healthy lifestyle.
Like the local football club, the running group, the yoga studio.
Yeah. Or you could be all about social welfare activities, supporting the elderly, helping those in need.
Those are all great examples. Now, one thing that often gets confused with ideal purpose is Gemeinnützigkeit, this whole nonprofit status for tax purposes.
Yeah, people mix those up all the time. It's important to separate them out. Just because you have an ideal purpose doesn't automatically mean you're gemeinnützig.
Because that Gemeinnützig status, that's something you got to apply for, right? And it comes from the tax office, the Finanzamt.
Bingo. It's all laid out in the Abgabenordnung, the fiscal code. To get the gemeinnützig status, you got to prove you're serving the public benefit. And that means meeting strict criteria.
What kind of criteria?
Well, your purpose and your actual activities have to line up perfectly with what the tax code says is beneficial to the public. Think things like advancing education, promoting public health, helping the disadvantaged. Your EV's Satzung, its constitution, basically has to reflect this too.
Ah, the Satzung. We'll get to that in more detail later, but just to clarify, a wirtschaftlicher Verein, the one with business aims, they can never be gemeinnützig, right?
Exactly. No way, no how. So we have ideal Verein, those with a nonprofit goal. Some of them are also gemeinnützig, meaning they get tax benefits.
But some ideal Verein might not be gemeinnützig, right? Like they're not in it for the money, but their goals aren't super broad public benefit either.
You're on fire today. Exactly. Think of like a club for people who collect stamps. They're not making a profit, but are they really serving a broad public benefit?
Debatable. So that's where the mutual benefit concept comes in. Non-commercial, but not quite charitable in that gemeinnützig way.
Perfect summary. Now let's talk about one of the big perks of getting registered, gaining legal personality. This is what makes an EV a real player, legally speaking.
Because it becomes like its own entity, a juristische Person in German.
Exactly. Separate from its individual members, and this means a lot. The EV can then own property in its own name, sign contracts, even take someone to court, or get sued.
Wow, it's like a real person under the law.
Basically. And this is where that limited liability really kicks in. Members are generally protected from being personally on the hook for the association's actions or debts.
Makes sense. And just to hammer this home, those rarer wirtschaftlicher Verein, the ones with the business purpose, they can't just register like anyone else, right?
Nope. Remember, they got to jump through those extra hoops, get that state approval, the Genehmigung, before they can even think about registering.
And as you said, that's not easy to get. So most groups just go the regular business route if making profit is the main aim. All right, we've got the legal foundation down. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. How do you actually go about registering an EV?
Okay, step one on your EV journey.
Ah.
Drafting the Satzung.
The what?
The Satzung, it's like the association's rule book. Think of it as the EV's constitution. Lays down all the essential details.
All right, what kind of details are we talking?
First off, the basics.
Yeah.
The association's official name, what its purpose is, and where it's headquartered.
So if we're starting, let's say, a photography club, we'd call it, I don't know, Berlin Shutterbugs, and put down our meeting spot as its HQ.
Exactly. Then you got to outline how membership works, who can join, how do you become a member, what happens if you want to leave, what rights and responsibilities do members have. It's all got to be spelled out.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. What else goes in the Satzung?
The governance structure. Most EVs will have a general assembly of all members. We call that the Mitgliederversammlung.
Makes sense. A way for everyone to have a say.
And then there's the board of directors, the Vorstand. They're the ones responsible for day-to-day management and making sure everything runs smoothly. The Satzung defines how many board members there are, how they're elected, what their powers are.
So it's all about setting up clear rules and decision-making processes right from the start.
Absolutely. And then you need to explain how the money's handled. What can the association's funds be used for? How are financial decisions made? Transparency is key. Now, if you're aiming for that gemeinnützig status, there's just some extra things you got to include in the Satzung.
Ah, here come those tax implications again.
Can't avoid them.
Yeah.
If you want the Finanzamt to grant you gemeinnützig status, you have to really show them you're walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
So concretely, what goes in the Satzung to make that happen?
First off, you need a crystal clear statement of your purpose. And it can't just be any old ideal purpose. It's got to be something that truly benefits the public good in the eyes of the tax office. You also got to have a rule that says straight up, no profit distribution to members.
So no one's getting rich off this EV. Any extra money goes back into pursuing those charitable goals?
Exactly. And lastly, you got to say, what happens to the association's assets, any money, property, if the EV ever dissolves?
Right, because it can't just disappear into thin air.
It'd all have to go to another gemeinnützig organization with a similar charitable purpose. This is about making sure those resources continue to do good. Now, given how much rides on the Satzung, it's actually really smart to get a heads up from the tax office before you go through the whole registration rigmarole.
Oh, like a test run.
Yeah, it's called a non-binding pre-approval. You send your draft Satzung to the Finanzamt. They take a look, tell you if anything's off.
So it's like, hey, is this going to fly or should we tweak some things?
Yes, exactly. It might take a few weeks, maybe 4 to 6, but it can save you a lot of hassle down the line. All right, step 2 on the EV journey.
Okay, hit me with it. What's next?
Time for the founding meeting. In German, it's the Gründungsversammlung. This is where all the founding members get together officially and
make this EV a reality.
You got it. First up, everyone's got to formally agree on the Satzung. Remember, that's the EV's constitution. Everyone's got to be on board.
So it's like, all right, team, are we all good with these rules? Any last-minute changes? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Pretty much. And then you elect the initial board of directors, the Vorstand.
The people who are going to steer the ship.
Right. Now, it's super important to keep detailed minutes of this meeting. In German, it's called the Gründungsprotokoll. This document records all the decisions made, who's on the board, approving the Satzung, everything.
So if any disputes pop up later, you can point back to this document as the official record.
Exactly. And finally, to show their agreement, each founding member needs to sign the Satzung. Boom, your EV is officially born. Well, almost.
Because now you've got to go deal with the dreaded bureaucracy. What's step 3?
All right, now the newly elected board, they're in charge of making it all official. They got to apply to register the EV with the Vereinsregister. Remember, that's at the local court, the Amtsgericht. But there's a catch.
Uh-oh, more paperwork hurdles?
Kind of. This application has to be certified by a notar, a notary public.
Those folks who make things official with stamps and signatures. So someone from the board goes to the notar with the signed Satzung and the Miets from the founding meeting.
Yep. The notar verifies everyone's identity, and then nowadays they usually submit the application electronically to the court. Make things a bit faster, luckily. Along with the application, you'll need a few documents that signed Satzung, with at least those 7 signatures from the founders.
Okay, making sure you hit that magic number. What else?
The minutes of the founding meeting. Got to have that official record. And a list of all the board members with their names and addresses. Sometimes the court might also want a statement confirming the address of the UV, where its HQ is, and a confirmation that the name you've chosen isn't already taken by another registered association.
Right, making sure there are no copycats. So you hand everything over, and then...
Then it's basically a waiting game. The court reviews everything, makes sure it's all legit, follows the rules.
How long does that usually take?
It really depends. Some courts are faster, some are slower, but usually you're looking at anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of months. Patience is key.
And if everything checks out, what happens then?
Then you're in. Officially registered, you get that glorious confirmation that you are now a Eingetragener Verein, and you can add those magic letters EV to your name.
It's like the official stamp of approval.
Right. And you'll get a registration certificate or an official extract from the Vereinsregister. This document is important. You'll probably need it to open a bank account, sign contracts, all that good stuff. Now, just a heads up. If the court finds any problems with your application, let's say, something's missing in the Satzung or the information isn't clear,
then things are going to grind to a halt.
Yeah. The court will likely get back to you and say, hey, fix this, and then we can proceed.
So dot your I's and cross your T's, folks. All right, so we're officially registered as an EV, but wait, if we're going for that Gemeinnützig tax-exempt status.
There's one more step. And it involves our favorite folks.
Yeah.
The tax office. The Finanzamt.
Oh, no, not them again. I thought we were done with bureaucracy.
Almost. Look, you've registered with the court, you're a legal entity, but getting that Gemeinnützig status, that's separate. It comes from the tax office.
So how do we make that happen?
You got to apply directly to your local Finanzamt. They have specific forms for this. You'll need to send them a copy of your registered Satzung, along with that registration extract you got from the court. They need to see that you're the real deal.
Okay, proving you're legit. And then what? The Finanzamt investigates you.
Kind of. They review everything very carefully. Remember those strict criteria for Gemeinnützigkeit?
Public benefit, no profit, distribution, all that jazz.
Yep. They're checking if you truly walk the walk. If everything's in order, they'll issue a document called a Freistellungsbescheid.
Oh, jeez.
It's basically a notice of exemption, the official "you are now tax-exempt" letter.
Hallelujah. But how long does this process take?
Usually a few weeks. But it could take longer sometimes, so don't get too impatient. Now, important point. Gemeinnützig status isn't a one-and-done thing.
Uh-oh. More hoops to jump through.
Not hoops, exactly. But you got to reaffirm your status periodically, usually every 3 years. You'll need to file reports with the Finanzamt, showing that you're still meeting those requirements.
Yeah.
Still doing good, still using funds properly, all that.
Right, proving you're still worthy of that tax-exempt status. All right, anything else we need to do after registration?
Good question. It depends. Let's say your EV is doing more than just holding meetings. Let's say you're running a little cafe to support your activities or...
Or selling merch with the club logo.
Exactly. If you're regularly doing commercial activities, even as a nonprofit, you'll probably need a business registration, a Geborgenmeldung. It's like getting permission to do business.
Okay, so even if your main aim isn't profit, if you're doing regular business stuff, you gotta let the authorities know. What about events?
Events, love them. But yeah, they come with their own rules. If you're planning to serve food and drinks, especially alcohol,
A beer garden fundraiser for the football club.
you'll likely need a restaurant license. We call that a Gaststättenerlaubnis. And hey, if you want to play music at your events, even background music, you got to get in touch with GEMA.
GEMA, they're like the music police, right?
Kind of. They handle music licensing. You might need permission, and you might have to pay fees, depending on what you're playing. And one more thing. If most of your board members are not EU citizens,
Another special case.
yeah, you got to report your association as an Ausländer Verein, a foreign association, to the authorities within 2 weeks of getting registered, just so they know. Okay, now let's talk money. How much does it actually cost to get this EV show on the road?
This is the part everyone's wondering about, right?
Definitely. The good news is, setting up an EV isn't usually super expensive. The main costs you'll face are during registration, those notary fees, and the court fees.
All right, break it down for me.
For certifying your application, the notar will probably charge around 30 euros, plus VAT if you're a nonprofit. Then the court fee for that initial entry into the Vereinsregister is usually around 75 euros. Plus, you'll have a tiny fee for the official publication of the registration.
So all in all,
You're probably looking at somewhere between 100 and 150 euros to get officially registered. Not too bad, right?
not at all. Though I guess if you hire a lawyer to help with the Satzung or need translation services, those costs would add up.
Yeah, true. But the good news is that application to the Finanzamt for Gemeinnützigkeit status, that's free. No charge there.
All right, so we're legally set up. Now, what about those ongoing costs? The stuff you need to run the EV.
Okay, this really depends on what your EV does. But some common costs you might face are things like GEMA fees, if you're playing music publicly, remember.
Yeah, gotta keep those music police happy.
Then there's insurance. It's really smart to have liability insurance, what we call Vereinshaftpflicht.
Because, let's face it, accidents happen.
Exactly. It protects the EV if someone gets hurt at an event or there's some kind of damage, whatever. And of course, if you decide to join a bigger umbrella organization in your field, there might be membership fees for that.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
What if you're a nonprofit? Any specific costs there?
Well, you'll definitely need to keep detailed financial records for the tax office. No getting around that. And if your EV starts growing or you decide to hire staff, you might need a tax advisor to help with the more complex stuff.
Okay, so as things get bigger, you might need professional help. But for those smaller clubs, the volunteer-run ones,
Often the members themselves can handle a lot of those tasks. Now let's talk about audits. Many people get freaked out about this, but it's usually not as scary as it sounds.
lay it on me. What are the rules?
For most small associations, you don't legally need a fancy external audit done by a big accounting firm. However, a lot of EVs will have internal auditors. These are volunteer members called Kassenprüfer. Their job is to...
Keep an eye on the money, make sure everything's above board.
Exactly. They review the finances each year and report their findings to all the members, usually at the annual general meeting. And because they're volunteers, there's no cost involved for the EV. Now, if you're a huge association or if you're getting loads of public funding, then...
You might need to bring in the big guns.
Yeah, in those cases, you might be legally required to have a certified audit done by a professional accounting firm. But for most smaller EVs, that's not necessary. Okay, let's tackle the beast. Taxes. I know, not everyone's favorite topic, but it's important.
Hit me with it. How are EVs taxed?
Okay, so huge difference between a Gemeinnütziger Verein, remember, the tax-exempt charity, and everyone else.
Because those Gemeinnützige folks get a bunch of sweet, sweet tax breaks,
They
right?
do. Any income that's directly tied to their nonprofit purpose stuff like membership fees, donations, grants that are specifically for their charitable activities, it's generally exempt from corporate income tax.
Ah, music to an EV's ears. No corporate income tax on those funds.
Tiddler.
What about trade tax?
Usually exempt from that too. And they often get a break on VAT, Mehrwertsteuer. Some charitable activities are completely VAT-free. Others have a reduced VAT rate.
Pretty sweet deal. But there's got to be a catch, right?
Well, there's one important thing to remember. If a Gemeinnütziger Verein starts doing commercial activities that are not directly related to its charitable purpose.
So if our photography club suddenly starts selling, like, I don't know, handmade jewelry.
Exactly. That's called an unrelated business activity. And if the income from these activities goes above a certain limit, currently it's around 35,000 euros per year, then that income becomes taxable.
Ah, so there's a threshold. You can dabble a bit, but if it gets too big, the tax man comes knocking.
Yep. Now, there's a special case called a Zweckbetrieb. This is where you have a commercial activity that does directly serve the nonprofit's charitable purpose.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say a museum runs a little cafe to enhance the visitor experience. That cafe is a Zweckbetrieb. Or a nonprofit theater selling tickets to its own performances.
So it's commercial, but it's directly supporting the core mission.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, income from a Zweckbetrieb is usually tax-exempt or taxed at a lower rate. Now, one last important point.
Huh.
Gemeinnützige associations, they never pay capital gains tax on things like investments or corporate income tax on those membership dues and donations they receive.
That's a huge advantage. All right, now what about those EVs that don't have Gemeinnützigkeit? How are they taxed?
Well, they're basically treated more like regular businesses. They'll have to file taxes on any profit they make, paying the standard corporate income tax, which is currently about 15%, plus a solidarity surcharge.
Ouch.
And if they're heavily involved in commercial stuff, they'll likely have to pay trade tax too, Gewerbesteuer. The rate for that depends on where the EV is based.
Makes sense. But I guess if you're, like, a simple cost-sharing club, just splitting the costs of activities, not trying to make a profit.
Then you might not have much taxable income at all. Now, what about VAT?
Umsatzsteuer. That's what it's called in German, right? Sometimes it's also called Mehrwertsteuer. Does that
Ah.
apply to EVs?
It can. Both Gemeinnützige and non-Gemeinnützige associations might have to collect VAT on things they sell if their annual taxable turnover goes over a certain limit. Currently, that's about 22,000 euros per year. However, there are some cases where charitable activities are either completely exempt from VAT or they have a reduced rate, just 7%.
Okay, so it gets a bit complicated with VAT, but there are potential breaks for charities. Now let's talk about those all-important donation receipts. In German, they're called Spendenbescheinigungen, right?
Yes, and those are like gold for donors. But here's the thing. Only EVs that are officially recognized as Gemeinnützig can issue those receipts.
So if you donate to a Gemeinnützige Verein, you get a receipt, and then you can deduct that donation from your own taxes.
You got it. It's a win-win. But it's crucial for those Gemeinnützige EVs to be super careful. They can only issue those receipts for genuine donations, where the donor isn't getting something directly in return.
Right, no shady deals.
If they start misusing that power to issue donation receipts, they can get into some serious trouble. The tax office will not be happy. All right, any other costs an EV should keep in mind?
Besides all the ones we've already covered, I feel like we've gone through a whole accounting course already.
Almost. Just a few more things. Remember those special permits we talked about?
For things like serving alcohol or playing music publicly.
Yeah, if you need those permits, there are fees involved. Got to factor that in. And again, that liability insurance, Vereinshaftpflicht, highly recommended. The premiums for that are another ongoing cost.
But probably worth it for the peace of mind. All right, let's talk about the people who actually run the EV, the board members, the Vorstand. What's the deal there?
So the Vorstand is the executive body. They're the legal representatives of the EV. By law, you got to have at least one board member.
Okay, one person at the helm.
But very often, your Satzung will say you need more, like a chairperson to lead the meetings.
A treasurer or Schatzmeister to keep track of the money.
Exactly. Maybe a secretary, a Schriftführer, to handle all the official documents and correspondence. It all depends on the EV and its needs.
Right. Some EVs might have bigger boards with more specialized roles. So how are these board members chosen?
They're elected by the members. Remember the Mitgliederversammlung?
The General Assembly where everyone gets together?
Yep. The board members are basically the directors or trustees responsible for managing the EV's day-to-day stuff and making sure everything runs according to the Satzung and the decisions made by the members.
Sounds like a big responsibility. What exactly do these board members do?
Lots of things. They've got the power to sign contracts for the EV, make decisions about how things operate. Now, usually, each board member can represent the association on their own.
So one person can make decisions.
Yep. But your Satzung can say that for certain things, really important decisions, you need, say, 2 board members to sign off. This is called joint representation.
Checks and balances.
Exactly. And the board has to follow the rules laid out in the Satzung. They can't just do whatever they want. They have to answer to the members.
Makes sense. So what are some typical tasks they handle?
Oh, all sorts of things. Managing the finances, keeping track of the bank accounts, dealing with membership stuff, like processing applications and resignations. They're also in charge of organizing the meetings, making sure all the legal and regulatory filings are done on time, and fundamentally, making sure the association's assets are being used properly for its intended purposes.
Sounds like a pretty full plate. And you mentioned something called a fiduciary responsibility. What does that mean exactly?
This is important. Board members, they have a duty, both legal and ethical, to act in the best interests of the EV and its members. They can't use their position for personal gain or to benefit their buddies.
It's all about putting the EV's needs first.
Precisely. And this is especially important for Gemeinnützig associations. Those tax benefits come with strings attached.
Because the Finanzamt is watching very closely, right?
Oh, yeah. The board has to be super careful with how they spend money, making sure it aligns perfectly with those tax-privileged charitable purposes. If they mess up, like issuing a donation receipt improperly or using donation money for something that's not charitable.
The EV could lose its tax-exempt status.
Exactly. And the board members themselves could even be held personally liable. So yeah, fiduciary responsibility is not something to take lightly.